So as the list continues on to our final list of items of kind of automotive user experience annoyances, we're touching upon the topic of comprehension, right, and understandability. Even piled onto that is findability. So I know the car can do this. I've done it before. I've seen it before, but now I can't find it. Even more importantly, if there's a button or an icon and I expect it to do something and I try it once and it doesn't do exactly that, it kind of creates this cognitive dissonance, right? This kind of confusion and maybe even a natural tendency to avoid it, right? So I think at a very base level, just being able to glance at things and understand what they mean and having a pretty reasonable understanding and anticipation of what they do and accuracy of what they do is really critical. So one of the hardest disciplines here is obviously driver assistance. I think every company is using different nomenclature, different naming, different feature names, different branded feature names, particularly around hands off the wheel, driver assistance levels, 2, 2.5, 3, and so forth, and whatever you call them, which is really challenging to the consumer market. I think when you even drive them and you've got a cluster of buttons on your steering wheel, you've got lane keep assist, you've got lane centering, you've got traffic jam assist, you've got cruise control, you've got adaptive cruise control, you've got distance setting. And then even in the settings themselves, you can go in and you can set limits and you can set over and under. And you can set intensity levels and sensitivity levels, how late you get warned or how fast the car speeds back up or all these things that honestly I don't think should be modulated, and the company should just design the single best way to do this. With driver assistance, the car is intervening, but it's intervening around acceleration, around braking, and around steering. And then it's warning you, right? So it's giving you these warnings. So how do you kind of wrap your head around just those 4 or 5 different dynamics between you and the vehicle and really understand what you're turning on and off and what even the limits are? Because sometimes controls can only be turned on at a certain speed. Sometimes a car will slow you down to a certain speed, but it won't completely stop you, right? Sometimes it will completely stop you very abruptly, and so on and so forth. So understanding all these limits is quite complicated, and honestly, most people don't go to the effort of trying all the variations and putting themselves in different conditions to see, what works and what doesn't work. So I think that's really critical, because especially as we get into this autonomous taxi world and we start to drive by autonomous 18-wheelers on the roads. We're crossing streets in front of autonomous vehicles and so forth. And how we think about them, how we feel about them is going to be really important as a society. Why do voice assistants still mostly not work? I think, I have a 2025 connected vehicle, and I'm going to say 50% of the time, and I'm a native English speaker, right? Just simple utterances, familiar words, the names of grocery stores, it just doesn't understand them. The vocabulary of the world is quite significant. There's many different ways people talk and many different languages, and this is a tough one to tackle and get right. And but there's I think significant consequences to just the sheer number of half-baked technologies and kind of mediocre implementations that have been put in over the years. So in general, I think we actually in contemporary research we see a lot of people spend 5 minutes turning things off, right, before they even leave the garage, which is a really unfortunate thing. We see people that can live with things not working a certain way when they're running a short errand or around the neighborhood. If they're taking a road trip or they think they have a critical emergency drive coming up or things like that, they have a different patience level, right? They have a little different intensity level. Worst of all, I think it's still people that think themselves not to be good with technology, right? Quite often we'll hear, it's not the technology, it's just me. I'm not good with these things, right? Or they just assume that it's not going to work all the time because they've just grown so used to the challenges of making connections or the challenges of loading their profile or those kind of things. So these are all things to fix. And again, that starts with one individual and the product and service, in this case, an automobile that they're interacting with, but that came from a dealership and it came from a brand, and I can call the brand to answer questions, and I can visit the dealership, and my frustration pretty much gets transferred to all these different entities. And in the end, especially with a lot of contemporary vehicles, we hear a lot of dissatisfaction. Next is the push and pull of branded integration and who you choose to associate yourself with. Whether it's I bought a car and I thought it had CarPlay and Android Auto and it doesn't, or I'm being forced to include Apple Music or Amazon Music or YouTube Music, in my selection set. It's already hard, between Sirius and FM and AM and Pandora and streaming from your phone and all these other things, right? So you have all these sources just to get to the type of music that you want to listen to, right? And the mood you want to set. Just as the technology should disappear, I think it'd be nice if there was a mandate that somehow the branding and the brand itself disappeared, or the sources disappeared, to a point where maybe it's preloaded or anticipates things for you, or it has an active dialogue with you that's more about the content and the outcome than the branded layers.